See, we're doing a session on pressure. So there are all kinds of pressures involved in journalism. And we're going to be very kind of open and Catholic in the sense of like broad and talking about all kinds of different sorts of pressures. So I suspect that there are multiple times that everybody in this room in the last year has felt under pressure with their work. And often that's probably been a kind of good pressure, because in the sense that as journalists and media workers and people who support media workers, we're actually really good at dealing with pressure. It's part of the job. We're very resilient in all sorts of ways. But sometimes that pressure can change in its intensity and stretch us in places that threaten potentially to overwhelm our capacity to work. So one of the words that we've used in the description is burnout. And people talk about burnout. I've been talking about a lot at this conference and also the last couple of years in response to the rise of authoritarianism, to armed conflict, to the economic pressures that we might experience in our work. Are contracts going to be renewed? Where's the next job going to come from? There are lots of ways that word is used. But what we often don't do is be a bit more forensic and start to kind of take apart and look at the different kinds of pressures that we can experience in different ways. And burnout is an interesting word, because sometimes burnout is just about being overwhelmed with work. And then sometimes when people are talking about burnout, what they're probably talking about is really the emotional challenges. And it's more perhaps to do with the difficult moral feelings, the sense of responsibility, and potentially something we call vicarious trauma. So I work for the Dart Centre for Journalism and Trauma, and I've been working now for a kind of number of years with journalists who are impacted by trauma in different ways. When you mention the word trauma, people tend to think that that conversation is limited to the question or not of whether people develop psychological injuries like post-traumatic stress disorder. And of course that's possible, and that, you know, with something we really have to work closely together to kind of deal with those things. But when trauma specialists use the word trauma, actually what they're talking about is a very kind of broad range of different things that come up whenever we're working on things to do with violence, tragedy, and so forth. So for example, you may be a journalist who works with traumatic imagery, and you may at times find it difficult to concentrate, feel a bit fragmented, feel a bit kind of fuzzy-headed. And those are trauma effects in small, tiny ways. And of course, sometimes that pressure can become much bigger if people are really exposed to very kind of heavy levels of kind of violent content. But that's enough about me, and I'll can talk more about that as we go on. And I'm delighted to have three speakers here who've been at the sharp end in different ways of exploring these issues and exploring ways of mitigating and working with sometimes very kind of challenging situations. So on my right is Rawan Damen, who is the Director General of ARIJ, that's the Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism. And she's going to talk to us in a second. She's been obviously at the moment, very heavily focused on the crisis in Gaza. But it's fair to say that you're no stranger to pressures, including government pressure and intimidation. And Rawan is also a very experienced journalist who's worked for ARIJ as a commissioning editor for many years and has done very kind of interesting multimedia projects trying to convey the complexity of life in Palestine as well. And then to her left, we have Rajneesh Bhandari, who's founder and editor-in-chief of the Nepal Investigative Multimedia Journalism Network. And as you can tell from the title, he's from Nepal. He does multimedia, and he's an editor and co-founder of that organization that works to bring journalists in the region together and to support them. He's also, of course, a journalist in his own right, and his works appeared in the New York Times, National Geographic, also Al Jazeera as well, and various other publications, so you can check out that as well. And then, last but not least, is Annie Kelly, who works for The Guardian and Observer's newspapers. She's the editor of the Rights and Freedom Project, and that's a big project looking at the kind of transnational investigations of human rights-related issues. And so Annie's been working at the sharp end on such issues as human trafficking, rights of immigrants and migrants as well, sexual and labor exploitation, and all kinds of issues that she can help talk us through. So let's start with Rawan. Can you give us a sense of what is pressure like at the moment for all the journalists that you're working with in your organization?
Thanks a lot, Gavin. Thanks to Humanity United, Liz, to bringing us all together. And I'm very glad it's a small room today, so we'll be, and I can see faces of friends, colleagues, partners we have been working with, and I think peer-to-peer support from some people in this room meant a lot to me personally and to our team, because you kept asking about us in the last 6 months. I think the last 6 months reflects very much the title of this panel today, When Everything is Urgent. It has been this way since October 7th. We at Arish have been training in Palestine among Arab countries for the last 17 years. We train in all Arab countries, Middle East and North Africa, investigative journalists and fact-checkers. In the last 5 years, we trained in Gaza, in Palestine, 250 journalists. 22 of them did with us investigations. When somebody does with us investigation or work within our fact-checking, Arab Fact-Checkers Network initiative, we know them very well. We know them very well. It means they work with us for 6 months, sometimes 1 year. We know them. We had dinners with them. We had coffee with them. We know a lot about their families and all of that. So when the war started, we reached out to our small community of the 22 different journalists in the first few days, saying, we don't know what this war will bring, and so if you need something and we can help in something, let us know. We never expected at that time at all that we are in front of a real genocide. We did not expect that at all, neither our community there. Slowly, they started losing everything. So none of our small community are now in their homes. All of them are displaced. Some of them displaced for the 6th time, which means that they are displaced the first time, living in another house, another place, and then in a tent, then in another tent, then a new place totally. And we didn't know what to do. It was for us a very new experience. Yes, you are right. We have community in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Libya. We faced moments of very high stress in 2011, 2013. We had journalists, investigative journalists. Some of our best investigative journalists had to leave the region. They live now outside of the whole region, from Yemen, from Egypt, from Syria. But in all of those cases, it was collaboration with other organizations of relocating journalists or finding a safe place for them within the same country. Maybe one of the worst also crises we had is the civil war in Sudan. February last year, one of our investigative journalists in Sudan called us. She did with us an investigation a few years before, and she called us and she said that I fear rape within the next few hours in my village, and how can you help? So we jumped with our safety expert with her. We stayed on the phone for 16 hours. Our safety expert stayed with her 16 hours until she reached a safe place. So I think the worst were like cases where people were really in not a safe place, and then we helped them somehow reach that safe place. But in Gaza, there's zero safe place to go to. And that for us was very complicated and is still the case. We cannot get them to a safe place. There's no safety. Some of them told us in the first few weeks, we don't want to work journalists anymore. It's not something we want to do. Others said, mostly we work with freelancers, so They are not connected with one media outlet. So when they lost everything, like their home was bombarded, everything they lost there, including their media equipment, which like their laptop, mobile camera, all of that, their car. So we thought, what can we do? And we started purchasing for them equipment from within Gaza. Because even when I called the Red Cross, they said that Israel doesn't allow any media equipment to Gaza from other places. So until today, for the last 6 months and more, there's no laptop, mobile, camera, microphone, battery, solar system, all of the things they needed can get in. But because we have been training for 17 years in Palestine, including Gaza, we know the production houses, we know the producers, we know the stores, so we started purchasing those equipment from the ground. Of course, the prices went quickly up, so the laptop that was $500 before the war is now $1,500. So we needed to do that, and this started at the beginning, and then slowly, when we reach with the mobile, and so slowly more journalists whom we trained, but they never did with us investigations or fact-checked content, came to us to say, you are the only organization who's doing this on the ground. And we're like, we have zero experience in doing this. We have never done this before. So we started like, how can we do this? Okay, we need to vet the journalists. This is a very complicated thing. So we started vetting them from the ground. So talking to our community to vet these journalists. Plus, the journalists need to send us like published content they did. So we'll know they are really journalists. And then some of them are with the syndicate, but many of them are not registered with the syndicate. It's very complicated. And with the months to come, we started reaching to the journalist with a mobile to find out that she and her family, they don't have food, they don't have clothes, they don't have a tent. So we started saying, no, this is a crisis. We need to purchase for them food, clothes, and say, okay, you have your things, then you can go and do your work as a freelancer and cover things. So in this process, I think we, at the beginning, forgot ourselves, that we wanted to help so much. We managed until today to help 150 journalists in Gaza. For me, that's a very good thing that we managed to do with the help of Reporters Without Borders, CPJ, Committee to Protect Journalists, OCCRP helped us, and many others, even our ongoing campaign that we opened for individuals. So individuals donated to help us do this, but at the same time, slowly, we became traumatized. Watching these things, listening to the stories from the field. I remember we called a journalist in the first month and said, what do you need? And he said, I don't need an equipment, I just need a shoe that is 41, size 41, because he cannot find that. So you hear all of those stories and you get traumatized with what's happening. So we had a colleague in Amman, Jordan, who has children, and she started having nightmares that her kids in Amman, Jordan, died. So she will wake up in the night and think about this and go to their room and check that they are alive. So we said, no, we need to have something. So we did, and thanks also to Humanitarian United and DART, we said we did online sessions for that. So Gavin, you gave us a session into this meeting, the whole team, and then we had a psychologist coming in person to the office, making offline with the team, like a group therapy, and then online, and making herself available for one-to-one consultation, because we found out that we cannot continue supporting while we ourselves, are not feeling well. And I cannot tell a lie that we are well, because things are not well. And when you know the people, when they are really colleagues and friends, when you know their artistic way of telling the stories, when you know the content, and you know that you can travel. I can come to Perugia, I can put myself in the plane from Amman, Jordan, and come, but they cannot even find a safe place for them, for their families. It's very difficult to cope with all of that.
Right, thank you so much. So, two things interesting there. One is this idea of how important it is to have some kind of space in which people can talk and process a little bit these kinds of horrendous experiences. And clearly this isn't about solving the problem. This is about kind of building agency for people. And the other thing I just wanted to reflect back very quickly is the story of the shoe, actually. is that very often we tend to think that the most important thing in a massive psychological crisis is trained counsellors, but actually what comes before any of that is the practical things. And so Rajneesh, let's we take you back to February 2020, if I dare to, and you were just starting a new startup, and it was all going to be very exciting, and you had great plans for new multimedia projects and in working in Nepal, and then what happened to you?
Yes, Gavin. Right at the time the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and so we started the Nimson, but our first task was not to produce investigative stories. Like the first thing was to respond to journalists. Like the pandemic was spreading, like many people and even journalists were getting affected with COVID-19. So we responded journalists with multiple efforts, like sometimes providing PPE sets, safety gears, equipments to like 400 plus journalists in all over Nepal. Sometimes we also sent like oxygen cylinders, because there was a lot of oxygen cylinders at the time, so trying to respond journalists at the time of need. And then only we shifted our attention to investigations, and then we did collaborative investigations on COVID-19 stories. But at the same time, we were also doing like a lot of webinars and support psychological counseling to journalists, which was very much important for journalists, because like the first batch of journalists who had COVID-19, they said like it really helped them to cope up with it, because if they had more information, more counseling, they said it really helps. And also like about like when journalists were in isolations, they were actually reporting stories from the isolation centers, like what was missing in the isolation centers and how they were feeling and how they were dealing with it. So this journalist really said like this, it's really important to have those information. So we connected them with psychological counselors, like doctors and medical professionals. So I think the biggest lesson we learned was like bringing the medical experts and to connect with them. And while talking about the pressure, I also want to talk about the Nepal earthquake that I reported like in 2015, like nearly like 9,000 people died, and it was a disastrous scenarios, like the houses being, like they were all turned down, like people dead and all those things. Like I was a freelancer at the time reporting for international outlets, and the kind of pressure and the pressure you take in when it's happening in your own village, in your own town, and then reporting on it, it's very difficult. It's very emotional, and also like reporting for international outlets, it's great, but also the thing, because the first story I filed during earthquake, as there was no electricity, there was no internet, was at 4 a.m. in the morning, and it was through a police station because there was no internet. So it's also the scenarios we filed these stories through is through a lot of pressure. So I think these are also important, how we plan these things and how we navigate. And recently, I also want to share about reporting about the Ukraine-Russia war, like the Nepalese being smuggled from Nepal to fight in the Russian war, and like interviewing these people like who are on the front line. As a journalist, what I could do is I could tell stories, but especially these young Nepalese who are on the front line asking for help, like asking to be rescued from the front line of war. I as a journalist, I could only report, but beyond that, I can't take anything. Like I could report stories, but it's the governments like who are responsible of bringing them back. But the Nepal government has not been able to bring like thousands of Nepalese who are being smuggled from Nepal to fight in this war. So I think it's, as a journalist, it's always something I could do is like tell the stories, but at the same time there's something I can't do because it's beyond my control, which is it's very emotional, and it's difficult, and I've spent many nights like just thinking about it, not being able to do anything as well.
Yeah. So this is this is obvious point. Just to reflect back, is that one of the universal experiences of being exposed to stories that involve traumatic content, that involve trauma, tends to be profound feelings of powerlessness and helplessness, and like, what can we do? Particularly, I think also the other issue about this is that we're often hearing stories remotely. So, stories that we see on TV screens, or we're looking at images in which there is no actual possibility of doing anything to prevent the situation. We're reporting at a distance, but some of the feelings that we might have if we were on the scene kind of come up. So it's a very kind of complicated picture, and I know that from Rawan and I were talking about this earlier, that that's a big issue for support workers. But I wanted to kind of move on to Annie and sort of set the scene, and then we'll kind of create some space for questions, and also talk a bit more about the things that we can do to mitigate, to reduce the pressure a little bit, so we have that feeling of control coming back, even if it's just a small sense. And Annie, and I was thinking of you, you've had so much experience, both yourself, of doing these very kind of complicated interviews with people who've experienced profound human rights abuses. And also you've had experience as well of supporting journalists who are doing that. And I guess one of the questions to kind of throw to you a little bit is, often don't we tend to kind of discount ourselves and say, well, my experience is much smaller than the other person's, and therefore I just need to battle on and not think about my own situation. I wondered if you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, so obviously I'm in a very different situation than the other people sitting at this table, in that I'm sitting in London in, almost complete security with, a secure job, knowing that I can go home to my family at the end of the day. I've done 12 years of reporting for The Guardian on issues like human trafficking, gender-based violence in supply chains, migrant rights abuses, and over the last 2 years been partnering with local journalists around the world, trying to get their stories about human rights abuses happening in their own community out onto The Guardian's global platform. And so it's been a strange experience having to recognise that the material that I work on, that I'm asking other people to work on, is very traumatic, even though it is at a distance. So often, you come up with strange feelings of guilt, or feelings that you don't deserve to be upset about the material that you're working on because it's not happening directly to you. And there's an enormous sense of responsibility when you're asking people to go in and do this reporting, to make sure that they are okay, and to make sure that they're able to talk to people who've faced very complex, very extreme forms of trauma, in a way that they're not always thinking and worrying that they're going to be able to deliver the story that me as their editor is asking them to do. So it's a very, it's often quite a kind of complex situation where you're trying to do your best by the story, you're trying to get the best story out, to expose something that's happening that is wrong, and something needs to be done about it. But at the same time, you're also dealing with trauma yourself, worries about the people that you're commissioning, and ultimately the most worry about the workers, or the women, or the communities, or the children that you're trying to report on. So it's been a very it's been a very interesting experience trying to deal with all of those different issues. And I think that the industry in general is getting better at recognising the issue of vicarious trauma. I'm lucky to work in an organisation where there has been support, and there's been support for me personally as well. But I do also think that the recognition of the situation facing local journalists on the ground when we're trying to tell those stories, and also the people that we're reporting on, if you're going and you're trying to ask people who face sexual violence or labour abuses in their workplace, making sure that you're able to reflect that trauma in a way that isn't upsetting or re-traumatizing them, but also is protecting the people that you're asking to work on that project along the way. So yeah, it's been a very, very interesting and often quite confronting experience. And I've definitely had to take steps to find ways to manage my own emotional and psychological reaction to that work. And definitely it's an ongoing process trying to work out how to support the journalists that I'm working with.
Right, no, thank you. Yeah, so I guess the thing is, big thing that happens, I mean, maybe we can reflect on this kind of quickly, is that we also have an obligation to our sources to look after ourselves. So in other words, if we become burnt out, jaded, and in a place where we can't process the information, one thing that can happen sometimes is that we actually get angry with other people, get overwhelmed, feel helpless, and then find ourselves getting angry with the person that we're interviewing, or irritable, or fragmented in different ways. And so one of the kind of key sort of things that we learned over the years at the Dart Centre is this idea that actually self-care is not self-indulgence, it's kind of self-preservation. And the reason why it's important is it's essential for preserving a space in which good journalism can happen. And if good journalism can't, in other words, if we don't as a community find ways, not collectively, to look after ourselves, then the issue is that we're basically creating the conditions for censorship. If we feel that the topics are so overwhelming that we can't talk about these kind of hard stories, which we need to talk about, then we're contracting the space for journalism. Anyway, it's very obvious, but sometimes we forget that, I think, in some ways. So let's maybe, we're going to talk a little bit more about mitigations and solutions. But I'm wondering maybe if we could have a few quick questions from the audience, just so that we kind of hear from people and find out what you'd like to ask. We'll group them as let's have 2 or 3 questions. And please, can we have questions, not speeches, just because the time is short. That's the only reason I say that. Yeah. So there's a microphone there. Who would like to ask a question? There's one right at the back to make the person with the microphone run the furthest distance. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Abbas Talib. I work with Muwatin. We're an independent media organization in the MENA region. Just very quickly, my question for Rawan, being the big, I don't want to say the biggest, the big organization in the MENA region, the media organization, given what's been happening in the last 6 months, I wonder, because even small organizations like us, for example, you feel a lot of responsibility. So responsibility for what's been happening to the people, but also equally to the journalists as well. So as the big organization in the MENA region, I just wonder about this responsibility that you're feeling and how is that affecting your work on a daily basis. Thank you.
Okay, so is another question in the room that somebody wants to ask? Yes, one at the front, so it's maximum distance to travel.
Hi there, I'm Eleanor from the Guardian video desk.
Hi.
And I was wondering if there's any way of ever bringing together journalists that are on the field with journalists who are at the desk, so people who are dealing with video content with people who are dealing with it firsthand, and if those conversations ever, if they've happened ever, if they've helped. Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, great question. So Rawan, what's helping manage the sense of responsibility?
Yeah, you are right. Of course, we are so proud of partnering with Muwatin. So Muwatin also is a great platform to follow. And they have Arabic and English content as well. And so we are not a media outlet. We are the largest pan-Arab regional network of investigative journalists and fact-checkers, and the largest media development Arab-based, in the region. And we felt the responsibility from day one, especially when we found out that usually international organizations who help in emergency couldn't work in the field in Gaza. They don't have anybody, and it's very difficult for them to function. They have no connection with production houses, stores to replace the equipment. And so it was, we have never done this work before. So for us, it was a responsibility that we put on ourselves, and we made this decision. I think the biggest decision we did as an organization, as a foundation, during the 6 months was to continue with our ARIJ 16th annual forum. This year is our 17th annual forum, and the 16th annual forum, it always happens on the first weekend of December. So last year, it was from the 1st to the 3rd of December, and since October 7th, many partners, friends, donors, even our community really questioned if we will be going ahead with our forum. All conferences of media were postponed and cancelled in the region. All conferences of any topic in Jordan were cancelled at that time. So we also thought about it seriously within the team. We consulted our board and some of our strategic partners, who some of them are here today, and we decided to go ahead. We did a full risk assessment of the situation to make sure that we have 500 people in person coming to Amman. And also we thought, will people talk about something but the war and the genocide? That was for us a big question, because when you gather fact checkers and investigative journalists in another, examples we had in front of us, nobody wanted to talk but about the trauma that's happening. And so we didn't want that only to happen, and we wanted also to show solidarity with Gaza. So we had an exhibition of the Palestinian journalists killed. At that time, they were over 70. Now we are talking about more than 120 journalists who have been killed. And so we had pictures of them. So you will get into the hall, you'll have the pictures of the journalists, their names, their pictures, where they have been killed. Then come to this big hall for 500 people and find the big picture of Gaza in the hall. And for us, that was extremely important. And some people were really upset of our position. And we might even lose working with them in the future, because it's not when you take a responsibility and you make your position, you need to understand that there are consequences for this. And for us, it was also we talked in the conference about AI, environment, climate change, gender issues. One of the colleagues came and said, there's a session about, gender violence and gender-based violence. Shall we cancel this? And I asked, did gender-based violence stop now? And so we need to understand that solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza, and also we cannot forget the Palestinian journalists in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, inside Israel, the Lebanese journalists. With all of that, all the other issues that are also extremely important and we need to tackle them are really important, and we need to continue doing this. I think it's, in this room we have Ithar Al-Azam in the first row, so just raise your hand, our executive editor in Arij, and Mohammed Komani, our senior data editor, and they, all of those, the team know those discussions. You need to have a team who can talk together, plan together, and make it happen. And I reached out to the team and I said, shall we cancel the forum? And all of them said, no, we need to be there. We need to get our voice. If we don't get this voice, it means we are betraying our community in Palestine. And for your question, also the fact checkers who watch the videos all the time are some of the most traumatized. It's not only being in the field. When you are on the desk showing this war has also have the AI-generated content that has been really, really viral. And so they watch all of that. And they are some of the first ones who couldn't sleep, and some of the first ones where we advise them how to blur some of the screen, how to get off the screen, walk a bit, and come back. And because even they told us that after they finish their work and start talking to his wife and the kids, all of them are talking also about what's happening in Palestine. So it's a thing that is ongoing from work also to home.
Great, thank you. I also like to pick up a little bit on the images thing. So I do a lot of work, training work with people who are working with traumatic images and working on war crimes investigations. And some of the people I've been working with over the years are from organizations in which that's all they do, basically, is look at pictures of war crimes or damaged bomb buildings. And the answer to part of the thing about this is people have very varied responses, and some people develop protective techniques that they find very useful, and there are all kinds of different things that go on. But one of the interesting things is that sometimes looking at images in a room, depending on the image, the subjective experience of that image can be worse than being in the field, because you might see there might be somebody injured, for example, like say a child is injured. The photographer has taken the photograph. The photographer knows that actually it's a lot of blood, but that particular child isn't doing so badly and they're going to get treatment, they're going to be okay. But the person on the input desk only gets the close-cropped images of lots and lots of blood, and particularly if the audio is really bad and the child is screaming. And that can be more averse from a distance than close up. The other kind of interesting effect is that photo editors often who've worked in the field before feel a kind of security because they've got the camera and that they're in a kind of adrenaline mode. And then when they come back and they relax, then there's kind of more space for things to come up in ways that actually might be helpful. It might be doing some helpful processing. So it's very complicated. And the actual answer to your question is yes, there have been times and opportunities for those two groups of people to come together and compare notes. And the thing that we're hearing, I think, across the panel is the importance of solidarity and is the importance of people coming together to discuss things. So Rawan was talking about the idea this conference could be cancelled. That wasn't the right approach because people needed connection as well. So how have you, maybe it's going to go to Rajneesh here, and how have you encouraged your journalists to, so Nepal, I don't know in detail about Nepali society, but I imagine it's like every other society, and it's quite difficult to get people together and to connect and to talk through these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's like Nepal, like we had around like 50 incidents of media violations in the last 1 year. And to keep journalists to talk about mental health and all those things, it's quite new because journalists don't talk about mental health, like they're asked to do stories, but not talk about their own health. So we are trying to bring this conversation among the journalists. We recently did a quite big seminar on well-being of journalists in Nepal, and some of the things that they said and talked about was like the media needs to have more policies, related to mental health. There should be a support system in the media houses. If something happens, then they should be able to talk about. And one thing what we are trying to do with our fellows, with our reporters, is to have a constant touch when they are going out for field for reporting. For example, we recently did an investigation on the new route of trafficking from Nepal to India to Myanmar, and one of our reporters went from Nepal to India to Myanmar. So we made a point that we should be in touch at least twice a day. And for him, it was a new experience because no one had before called him and asked him how he's feeling, how is everything going. And when he came back to Kathmandu, he said well, this is something new. I experienced that. None of my previous editors had actually called me, or none of the staffs had actually called me how I'm feeling and how I'm doing it. So I think something to bring which about the decks and reporters, also about the editors and reporters, and as a team, I think something which we were trying to include, we do a risk assessment before they go to the field, but also constant check-in, and also 24 hours a system going on, if something happens, and how we make sure that that person is rescued from that place, and all those things. I think having those plans are very quite important, and at the same time, to keep this discussion about mental health is quite important, because in our society, people don't talk about mental health. So to talk about, to discuss about, and making sure that, because it's quite normal to discuss and all those things, the emotions, to cry is normal, because people feel that they should not cry. As a journalist, you should not cry. It's quite normal to cry as a journalist as well.
Yeah, no, it's important. So Annie, how are you what are you thinking of in hearing?
Firstly, it's just, it's obviously really humbling to sit here and listen to how, the fact that operating constantly at that pitch of chaos and emergency and alarm and trauma is unimaginable, really, if you're not experiencing it firsthand. The things that I find is that, for instance, when we were working with some young Iranian journalists on the Women Life Freedom protests, was some of them were inside Iran and some of them were outside, working in London and the United States. And I think it was, I felt like the pressure, the constant pressure on them, and the feeling of responsibility that they had to get this reporting out and to get it right and to get it in a global news organisation as fast as they could was so enormous. And it was, I would lie awake at night worrying about whether we were asking too much of them to take such risks. Often their families were still inside Iran. The journalism itself was so important, but I just understood that the pressure on them, these very often young women, was relentless. And yet, the most important thing for them at that moment was to get the reporting out. Mm-hmm. And so it was a very difficult line to kind of walk, because you can say, are you okay? Do you want to take a break? Is there anything we can do? Is there, would you like to just sit out for a couple of weeks? Can we get you in? But actually their need to get the journalism out, to get the story out, was so great that in a way, they were professional journalists who were trying to do their job at a moment of great trauma, and as an older woman as well, because they were kind of, in their early 20s, it was just, it was a very difficult time, and trying to relentlessly cover that story in a way that was keeping the readers engaged and keeping the, internally people interested, was a very difficult experience, but I felt enormous responsibility for those journalists, and often quite powerless as well in terms of being able to help them, aside from enabling them to do their job in the best possible way.
So a very quick follow-up on that. So some things are free. Some things don't require a lot of resources. So what did you find things that, maybe this is a question to everybody as well, that in those high-pressured situations, when you're having kind of basic conversations with somebody who's in a place and under real stress, what kinds of things helped, though, in the sense of how you dealt with that sense of their fear?
I think I asked them that question, and I think somebody saying, are you okay, and do you want to take a break, and is there anything we can do, was enormously helpful. But also what they told me was just being a conduit for which to get their work out there was the biggest. So respecting them as professional journalists, and when they said, I'm okay, I want to carry on, respecting that as well. And in terms of free stuff, I think it's just literally just checking in and making sure, asking about their families, asking if they're okay, asking if there's anything that I could do to help. Apart from that, it was that feeling of powerlessness. But I think just the emotional support and that kind of as much pastoral care as you can give in that situation is really, really important when you can't do anything else. And obviously following up with any wraparound support you can do after that period of emergency is ended.
Right. So I want to go to questions in a second, but I was wondering, just in terms of how we talk to each other, whether, Rawan, there were things that you found more useful.
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's not one size fits all, because we have, our fingerprints are different as every human being, which means how we think and how psychologically we are, it's so different. I think one of the things that I found with time, that when you ask somebody if he or she is okay, they will say yes, but this is not the truth of what's happening. And so the thing is, you do what you can for this person, because none of them will come and tell you that they need this kind of support. So just do it. Just do the thing. And maybe I'll say a very small story about this. I was traveling in Italy many years, like 5 years ago. I lost my bag. I reached a place where we had training with all of the people who were there were strangers to me. So I've never knew them before, we are not friends, and so. And I went to this dinner, and I told them that I lost my bag, and they said, oh, Rawan, I'm so sorry, hopefully it will come, and all of that. And we finished the dinner, and then I went to my room, and I found out this is a remote place where nothing around, there's no pharmacy, no store to buy things. And at that moment, I realized that what I will do. Now I don't have anything with me. And at the table, everybody said, do you need anything? And I said, no. And then a lady from Norway, Elizabeth, she knocked at the door of my room in this hotel, and she brought her things to me, like pyjama, towel, toothbrush, all of that, and she gave it to me. And for me, that was a lesson in life. Never ask a person, do you need something? Are you okay? Because everybody will say, no, I am fine, but do the thing that you need to do. And this is, I think, what we learned with our Palestinian journalists in Gaza, but just as Annie said, they want purpose in life to get their stories out. That's for them extremely important. They feel that they, as a journalist, the ones who want to continue getting their story out, is part of the psychological, mental support that they need. And many outlets out there who are taking those images, videos, content from within Gaza and publishing it is doing great mental support also for them.
So a lot of so in some ways, the psychological support is also about the really basic things, like meaning, connection, the stuff that is built into the work.
Can I add something, Gavin?
Yeah, please.
The three of us met in DC when we were invited by Humanity United in October 2022. We were strangers to each other at that time. And then, now we are collaborating, doing projects together. We published with Guardian, Arij and Guardian, and we are doing another, investigation in Gaza, also with Guardian, in a bigger consortium these days. So I think it takes, when you meet people and talk to them, at the beginning, you don't understand it, but then, now when I meet with Annie, it doesn't take much to understand. She knows if I am well or not. It doesn't take much for that to happen, but just you need to break those ices and make cross-border collaboration happen.
Great, thank you. So questions, do we have questions from the audience? So Ma, who's the woman with the blue top.
Hi, I'm Mar Cabra, and I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Self-Investigation, which is a nonprofit that promotes mental health and well-being for journalists. I want to commend you for everything you're doing, and I want to build on what you just said about collaboration. We're used to collaborating about stories. How can we collaborate to take care of each other's mental health and to share best practices, right? So you were sharing that you're doing a workshop in Nepal. How can we learn about it? How can I apply that in Spain? How could we apply that in different Nigeria, especially at a global level, right? Because I feel that sometimes some best practices come from Anglo-Saxon countries that have very different realities to the realities you are describing. Thank you.
Anybody have have you got any more questions in the room? So any thoughts on that? So Rajneesh, maybe? Yeah.
Sure. I think collaboration is the key. So I think we need more discussions and programs as this where we could know about what each one of us are doing. So I think we could share about our findings and also better ways to deal with the issues as well. And also I think the cultural issues that we each face in our own countries and how we deal with these are also quite important. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think there's also, I'd say there's a lot to learn. There's the how you run a workshop question. There's also a lot just to learn from other people's experiences. And this thing we've been hearing about, the importance of meaning, is it's such a kind of fundamental thing. And I've been working on projects with Ukrainian journalists, and what they found at the beginning, particularly at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, was just how important it was to do the journalism. But one of the kind of, really, they had to go out and they had to report as hard as they can. But one of the things about anything that we might do to look after ourselves, at a point it can have a diminishing rate of return. So Rawan was talking earlier about people feeling exhausted. And so what journalists told me was that they would, after a while, there was a problem developed in which people would carry on interviewing more and more survivors of war crimes without taking adequate rest. And of course, that affects their work as well. It also sometimes affects people's capacity to continue the work in a more fundamental way. In other words, people get burnt out. And one thing I think is really useful in this kind of thing, thinking about meaning, as thinking about each of us has got a battery, and we need a full battery to do the meaning work. And then if we don't build in some kind of rest and recovery, then what happens is that we start to lose that capacity to do the work. So thinking about recharging. So we've got, I think, a couple of minutes left. And I was wondering whether I could ask, well, Rawan, you have a comment, and then, yeah.
Just there's the Self-Investigation is doing a mental summit online, free for everybody in October. We are partnering to support that. So I think the world is becoming more understanding the need of really sharing knowledge into this.
Great. So I wanted to just ask you, each of you, because sometimes we're talking about really, really difficult, challenging situations in which we're talking about working on, profound human rights abuses, genocide, atrocities, and so forth. But nevertheless, when you're in a difficult situation, can you give me one small thing, tiny thing, that helps you to recharge your batteries and feel you have more energy for the task? Yeah, each one of you. Yeah.
You want to start with me?
Yes, please.
I talked to my mom, who's watching us online now, and she's my one to get my battery in energy again.
Great.
For me, I just do the breathing exercise, like just being aware about the breath and being present and accepting as things they are.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Well, I normally try and go for a walk outside and turn off my phone. But, yeah, if that doesn't work, I normally just listen to music. Really, it's very cheerful music, very, very loudly, and take a screen break.
Yeah, but it's a bit more than that, isn't it, though? So you actually, you worship trees, effectively.
Basically, yeah. Yeah, the nature is it has a very, very good, profound effect on giving you perspective, I think.
Yeah.
So getting outside into the fresh air and looking at a different horizon, I think is very important.
Yeah, so in this, there is actually, I've already talked to several people in breaks. There is a kind of secret cult of kind of tree huggers and nature lovers hiding in this hard, brutal world of analytical forensic journalism. And so that's a kind of like final invitation, really, to everybody on this panel. So we've come up to the end of time. But whatever it is that helps recharge your batteries, please maintain contact with it. And also go out and convince everybody in your organisations to do the same, and then we can, I think, create space, a better, stronger space for doing challenging, difficult journalism. So I'd like to thank our panel and for telling us so much, and also for you attending as well and coming here. Thank you.